I'm a 27-year-old woman who moved to the US almost 7 years ago. I have two half-sisters from my dad's side, born to different women. We used to be very close, even though they're technically illegitimate. I shared part of my small inheritance from our grandparents with them, but our father never acknowledged them and left them with nothing. 2 years ago, my sisters also moved to the US. The middle one, let's call her Mary, got a company to sponsor her for a work visa. The eldest, Karen, who's 30, got a student visa and moved in with me since I already had a job and a decent salary. Our deal was simple. I'd cover all the bills and food, and she'd find a job at the university since she couldn't work elsewhere due to her visa restrictions. All I asked was for her to pitch in with some minor chores around the house. I have a dog and a cat, but I assured her she wouldn't have to worry about them while she was busy with school and work. Plus, I have a step-family who often helps out with household tasks, especially since I help babysit for them. It seemed like a fair arrangement, especially for a student. But apparently, it wasn't enough. While Karen was in school, she met a guy named Ken. I knew him from my university days. He's not exactly the best guy around, but I didn't think he was a serious threat. Karen, however, was smitten with him. Despite my warnings about Ken's reputation, she didn't care. I agreed to let her make her own choices, as long as Ken didn't come over to my place. Then, COVID-19 struck. My work hours got cut. Karen's school was put on hold, and she lost her campus job. With everything going haywire, we had to downsize and move into a smaller apartment. I took on a second job and did some freelance work on the side, which left me with barely any personal time. I was dating someone, but both of us were overwhelmed with work and bills, so we hardly got to see each other. Meanwhile, Karen and Ken were getting closer, and he started showing up at our apartment, despite Karen not being on the lease. My landlord was understanding, but Ken's behavior became increasingly inappropriate. He would make comments about my appearance, calling me exotic due to my mixed Caribbean heritage, while Karen resembled our European-descended father more closely and was considered more conventionally attractive. Ken would invade my personal space and touch me inappropriately. I tried to avoid him by staying in my room or walking my pets whenever he was around. Despite my discomfort, Karen kept insisting that I spend time alone with Ken to bond with him, even though they had only been dating for 7 months at that point. I made excuses to avoid it. In November 2020, I got a better position at my main job, allowing me to quit my second job and have more free time. I reconnected with friends, and one of them expressed concern about my well-being. He informed me that Ken had been bragging about how close he was to having intimate relations with me, which I found deeply disturbing. I made it clear to everyone present that I had no interest in being involved with Ken in any way. Since my city is small and close-knit, many people reached out to share similar unsettling experiences with Ken. I confronted Karen and Ken about his behavior, and they didn't deny it. Ken even claimed that Karen had given him the green light and that I was doing them a favor by fulfilling his fantasy. I was disgusted and told them both that Ken had to leave immediately, or I would involve the authorities. Ken left after hurling insults at me, and Karen began downplaying the situation, claiming that my partner and I were on a break, which wasn't true. I firmly told her that she couldn't treat me like property and gave her 2 weeks to find her own place. I reached out to our relatives, sharing the text messages I received, and none of them wanted anything to do with Karen. A few days later, she moved in with Ken. I managed to obtain a restraining order against Ken, but couldn't get one for Karen. They largely disappeared from my life, except for a few minor encounters that I quickly resolved by threatening to call the police. Then something happened today that made me hold back laughter. Mary, keeping tabs on Karen as sisters do, messaged me with surprising news. Karen had called her, revealing she was pregnant and that Ken had kicked her out. I was initially stunned but replied casually, expressing no interest in getting involved. Karen then used Mary's phone to call me, begging for help. She played the family card, saying she had no one else to turn to and knew I had family health insurance. She even suggested that I should feel obligated to help with her pregnancy expenses, since the baby was a blessing and that I should want to be a part of raising it. I let her pour her heart out for a few minutes before bluntly refusing and ending the call. She attempted to call again, but eventually gave up. I received a text from Mary apologizing for the barrage of calls, as she accidentally left her phone on the counter. Most of my family, including Karen's mom, supports my decision. The only dissenting voice is Karen's aunt, who isn't biologically related to me but whom I've known for years, so I refer to her as aunt. She had been pressuring me all day until I warned her that I'd share her texts with my stepfather, who happens to be her landlord. That shut her up. As for the baby, I do feel a twinge of sympathy, but ultimately, I can't help but think, this is not my problem. My parents were old-fashioned and preferred to give what little they had to their legal grandchildren. My father had many children from different relationships, some of whom I might not even know about. My grandparents grew tired of having new grandchildren pop up every other year, often with a mother looking for handouts. Regarding Karen's visa, she had an extension due to COVID-19, but that has expired, and she's now overstaying her visa. Sadly, this is a common occurrence, and while I don't agree with it, I'm somewhat implicated due to my stepfather being American. This morning, Mary called me to meet up for brunch and talk about Karen. Mary understood that I didn't want to be involved in the drama, but she felt it was important to discuss things before she left the state. She's always been the peacemaker among us siblings. I agreed to meet, but only on the condition that Karen wouldn't come home with me. Mary assured me that if Karen tried to follow me, she'd personally make sure she stayed away. So, I got dressed and headed out for brunch with my sisters. I'll spare you the fake family niceties Karen tried to pull once we finished eating and were just having coffee. Mary laid everything out on the table. She explained that she couldn't take Karen with her because she's getting married to her longtime girlfriend and they can only afford a one-bedroom in their new city. She made it clear that Karen was delusional as she thought Mary would let her live with me. Even if she had the power to make me take Karen back, Mary made it clear that Karen was lucky she'd let her stay with her for the past few days. Mary said the only reason she was helping at all was because Karen's mother had begged her to find a safe place for Karen or help with the pregnancy. Then, Mary turned to me and asked if there was anything I'd be willing to help with financially, considering I'm the most stable economically. I know it might sound harsh, but I had to think about what's best for me. Feel free to criticize me for it. I made it clear to Karen that I would only offer financial assistance for 3 specific things: either termination and a hotel room for recovery, a ticket back to her home country where she could live with her mother or aunt and access free health care, or a ticket to our eldest brother's country where I knew he would support her. I also mentioned adoption as an option, but I wouldn't be providing her with a place to stay or covering her medical expenses out of my own pocket. I provided her with links to nonprofit organizations that could offer assistance. Karen began crying, accusing me of trying to take away her baby and being a bad sister. She argued that a good sister would open her home and help care for her baby. She also attacked me personally, claiming that I didn't deserve the money I had and that I was spoiled by our mother because of her wealth. However, most of my inheritance came from my mother's side, as she built a successful company from scratch after our father left us with nothing. Karen's hurtful words continued until she hit a nerve by mentioning my infertility. While I had accepted my condition, it still stung. Mary intervened, threatening to kick Karen out if she made any more hurtful remarks. I remained composed, despite the emotional onslaught. Karen, sensing she had gone too far, stopped crying and seemed to come up with a plan. Karen shocked me by suggesting that I adopt her baby, and I couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of it. Adopting her child was out of the question. I didn't want Karen or her ex anywhere near my life, let alone their baby. While I didn't hold any ill will toward the child, I had no desire to be involved in raising it. I was on the verge of giving Karen a piece of my mind, but Mary intervened just in time. Mary laid out Karen's options plainly. She could either terminate the pregnancy or return to her home country. Either way, she couldn't stay with us because of her legal status, which could jeopardize Mary's job and my residency status. Karen had until the following Friday to make a decision. Mary made it clear that she didn't want Karen near me, fearing for my safety, and declared that Karen had lost the privilege of spending time with either of us in person. She even offered Karen a place to stay for one more week, but after that, she was on her own. Mary's assertiveness caught me off guard, but it was exactly what I needed. She swiftly paid the bill and whisked me out of there, providing the protection and support I didn't realize I needed. As we left, I couldn't help but shed a few tears of relief, grateful to have an older sister who still looked out for me. After our intense discussion, Mary and I decided to lift our spirits with a childhood tradition, getting ice cream. We talked about our plans to spend holidays and vacations together, trying to focus on happier things. Mary's girlfriend joined us, and she lightened the mood with jokes about how sad she'll be without her moving table, referring to Mary, who's taller than both of us. It's an ongoing joke between them, nothing too serious, thankfully. Later, Mary and her girlfriend will join me for dinner, depending on how things with Karen unfold. I'll try to update everyone, but honestly, I think it's pretty much over with Karen. I'm not sure if she'll choose any of the options we gave her, or just do her own thing, but either way, I'm sticking to my boundaries. And yes, Mary is my hero through all of this. If anyone was curious, Karen has made her decision. So, as the title suggests, my older half-sister Karen has made a decision. Here's the short version of what happened. Karen was living with me rent-free when she started dating a creepy guy. Her boyfriend had some disturbing fantasy involving both Karen and me, which she agreed to without my consent. I kicked her out, and she moved in with him. Eventually, she got pregnant, and he kicked her out too. She then expected me to not only take her in, but also support her and her baby financially. My sister Mary and I offered her a few options for her unplanned pregnancy, including termination, returning to our home country, going to our brother's home country, or figuring out how to raise the child or put it up for adoption. She had until tomorrow to decide, as Mary was leaving for the East Coast on Saturday. However, Karen didn't choose any of these options. Instead, she made things worse for herself and ended up getting arrested, likely facing deportation. Here's what happened. On Tuesday, Mary decided to visit a nearby national park for one last trip before moving too far away. She left Karen with a key and some money, which turned out to be a big mistake. When Mary and her girlfriend returned yesterday, they found out that all the locks on their house had been changed. To make matters worse, Karen's supposed ex, Ken, had moved into their house. Mary should have seen this coming, but she and Karen grew up as best friends, even closer to each other than to anyone else, including me. Obviously, things had changed drastically now. When Karen and Ken claimed that Mary's house was theirs, it caused a huge mess. Mary tried to explain that the house wasn't even hers anymore. It had been sold, and the new owners were due to move in on Sunday. The police were called, and everyone had to show their IDs. Karen only had an expired passport, which led to her getting arrested for immigration charges. Ken was arrested for breaking and entering, among other charges. Then, I got a call from Karen's lawyer, who said Karen was claiming to be my surrogate and that the baby she was carrying was actually mine. Yep, she really tried that. I made it clear to the lawyer that I wasn't looking for a surrogate or planning to adopt a child. I already have foster children, and I don't have space for another. I told the lawyer that Karen got pregnant accidentally with Ken. The lawyer tried to negotiate, saying Karen would likely be deported otherwise, but I stood firm. If that's the law, then so be it. I asked the lawyer not to contact me about Karen anymore. Apart from the scare with the new locks, Mary is okay. The realtor has copies of the new key for the family that owns the house now. Mary and I have decided to cut off all contact with Karen. I'm not sure what will happen to her, and honestly, I don't care anymore. Even our family back home wants nothing to do with Karen, and some have even apologized to Mary and me. As for Ken, his fate remains to be seen. Well, Who knows what will happen with Ken? Honestly, I hope he ends up in jail. But if he doesn't, I couldn't care less. I feel like a huge weight has been lifted off my shoulders. I want to thank everyone who sent well wishes to my sister Mary and me, as well as those who shared advice that I'm really glad I listened to. This family mess has probably been the worst I've dealt with since my parents' divorce, and it all came from the last person I would have expected. I don't have any entitled stories aside from this. Karen used to be a good sister, but I guess when money and comfort come into play, people change. A quick update that's not really worth a separate post. Karen was offered the chance to leave the U.S. voluntarily without facing any negative consequences for her immigration status. She called my mom to try to convince me to give her money for the ticket. Mary and I agreed to pay for the ticket on the condition that she never contacts either of us again. Her mom is aware of this and basically told me that Karen will have to find a job within a month of arriving or she'll be on the streets. As for lawyers and stuff, I have my own immigration lawyer who's aware of the situation, and he told me that the surrogate plan wouldn't work without a DNA match or a contract, neither of which exists. So I'm safe. Mary booked Karen's trip back for Friday, and good riddance. Seriously, what was Karen's plan exactly? To just take over someone else's house, especially one that's already been sold. Karen and Ken are as clueless as they are entitled. And I'm horrified that they're bringing a child into this world. I genuinely feel sorry for the unborn baby, and I hope they end up with someone who has empathy and good morals. The timing couldn't have been better for Mary with this whole mess happening just as she's moving to another state. Karen won't know how to find her. But I do worry about Mary's girlfriend, especially since Ken is still around. For her safety, I hope she keeps tabs on him. I know she wants this all to be over, but it might be a good idea for her to know what happens to him because he's proven himself to be a real creep.